Awesome. And do we have an idea of about how long it might take to get down to the seafloor?
It'll be it'll be about 100 minutes.
Cool.
Yeah.
So an hour and 40 for...
What would you like from us, Sam?
All right, so a little bit of background on the Samoan Clipper. The aircraft itself, it was a 4-engine S-42B type flying boat. It was built by the Sikorsky Aircraft Corporation. And the point of this aircraft boat, like the name sort of gives it away, right? It was meant to land on water and to reach places that typical planes that required a landing strip maybe couldn't make it. So the S-42B, Russ, our lead scientist on this expedition, will just have all of the information for you. But there were just a handful of these aircrafts made, and it's an elite plane, and the crew that were manning it, there were 7, including Pan American chief pilot Captain Ed Musick. He was a pioneer in the aviation industry. He had around 10,000 piloting hours, and he also made the cover of Time magazine in his heyday. So he was sort of this hero when it comes to aviation. And so the Samoan Clipper was tasked to inaugurate the first regular airmail service between the U.S. and New Zealand. So Musick and his crew, a crew of 6 other men, were setting out. They departed Pongo Pongo with more than 700 pounds of cargo and 2,300 gallons of gasoline. And it was set out to be about an 1,800-mile leg from Honolulu to Auckland. Before last radio transmission, Musick had reported an oil leak and that his crew would be turning back. And that was the last word that anyone has heard from them. So the mission now is to see if Argus can map that seafloor and find any anomalies that might be resembling an aircraft. And if so, we'll send Hercules down and also do a little bit more in-depth characterizing of the site. All right, Trevor, I have a question for you.
Okay, shoot.
Okay, we have a viewer who wants to know why the earlier dive was aborted.
Well, that's a good question. We had a plastic bracket on Argus, it broke. The fasteners just came right out of the bracket, and it was a little bit loose. So before any major equipment damage happened, we recovered it and put some new holes in it and bolted it back together and put it back in the water.
You make it sound so simple.
Problem solved.
All right. So once we get down to the seafloor, what exactly are we doing? What sort of technology is using this scanning, is doing the scanning and the mapping?
So we are using a side scan sonar. This is a typical instrument used to map the seafloor for not only archaeology, but also for geologists and for other habitat mapping activities. A side scan sonar uses sound. There are 2 transducers that are mounted on Argus that send out an acoustic signal, similar to the way that bats echolocate or dolphins send out sound to get a view of their environment. The sound is transmitted down to the seafloor and bounces off the seafloor or rocks or man-made objects and comes back and is interpreted in the screen that we'll be bringing up shortly that shows the bottom.
And we logged a few interesting sort of potential points in the last dive or two, didn't we? What sort of characterizes these points? What makes them, stand out from maybe rocks or sand dunes or other things that have those sort of hot spots?
Yeah, on the earlier dive, I think we logged about 10 targets, and what we are looking for is something that is man-made. It might have straight lines, right angles, a pronounced shadow. That would denote that it's not natural in origin. If you think of, the typical shipwreck with a straight line versus a boulder field or sand ripples, that is how we determine what we choose for a target.
And then I guess, an interesting thing too is that we're just using Argus. And is that something that is sort of novel in this approach for the Samoan Clipper?
Definitely. Typically, the side scan sonar is a towfish. It's sort of a long cylindrical tube with those transducers mounted on it. that is towed behind a research vessel. But due to the depths that we're going to be surveying in, we are using Argus, which is heavier and has more capabilities to reach these depths, as well as the amazing video cameras that are mounted on it that not only provide us a view of the seafloor, but it fills in a gap that is located right below the sonar where we are missing information. So we are extremely excited to be able to be using Argus in ways that it hasn't been used in a while.
Dee Dee, you were on the flight from Samoa yesterday, right?
Yes, I was.
Okay, so I mean, we had such a wild conversation that we are coming on as onsigners to the ship yesterday, and we started with this flight path coming from Samoa that very much resembled the Samoan Clipper's path, right?
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing experience, especially because the small plane that we were in flew at a relatively low altitude, and we could get an amazing view, similar to what the Samoan Clipper had as it departed Pongo Pongo and then experienced some difficulties, and getting to Apia, it started to turn around and head back. So we weren't exactly retracing those steps, but we could visualize in our minds the captain and his crew as they were encountering these difficulties and trying to land their plane safely.
Yeah, and I think it'd probably be helpful if we could maybe do a refresher of sort of that timeline of what they experienced, right? I mean, taking off and then having these difficulties turning around. Would you mind sort of running down what it was that occurred that day?
Sure. So the Simone Clipper departed Pongo Pongo at about 5:30 in the morning on January 11th, 1938. Everything was well for about an hour until they encountered an oil leak in engine number 4. After they had these problems, they shut down that engine and decided to return back to Pongo Pongo and hopefully land. During their circling, the Simone Clipper was sighted flying over Apia, and at that time it also began dumping fuel to lighten its load and be able to land easily. Since it had just departed, it was fully stocked with fuel, and it was not typically something they were going to do is land right after taking off, so they needed to lighten their load. Really, there's not much contact until the last radio signal from them at 8:35 when the contact was lost. A local fisherman spotted the downed airplane in the area that we are at today, and about a few hours later, the Navy sent out a search plane and spotted a oil slick on the water. So they had assumed, based upon the oil slick and also the debris that was recovered, that the plane had been lost with all of its crew. So really, we don't know much more than that. So that is why this is a incredibly important story to be told, and to find its remains and document those archaeologically to not only try to determine what happened, but to also provide some closure for the families and to record this unique historical and archaeological resource.
Right, and then how, this was 81 years ago, how have we come to find this 2 square mile area that we're researching right now, that we're diving in?
That's a good question. It's a big ocean out there. So our best reports do actually come from those search efforts immediately after that went out and found that oil slick, as well as the debris. So even though it was 1938, they did have a pretty good positioning description with a latitude and longitude, and that is what our survey area is based upon today.
Dee Dee, we have a question coming in about the eyewitness that you mentioned. What exactly did this person describe seeing? I mean, did they see the plane as it was descending? Did, what was sort of that visual that they described?
So reports are that local fishermen spotted smoke off of the northern part of Tutuila. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. They also reported that there was a plane with its wings visible on the surface of the water for several minutes before sinking. So that is especially good news for us, since there could be a larger amount of intact remains, such as the wing that sat high above the fuselage. This wing measured about 118 feet long, where the 4 engines were mounted, so that is one of the main features that we are keeping our eyes out for with the side scan sonar. That would be a fairly long object with some distinctive shape to it. So we hope to find the wing as well as the other parts of the plane. But it is because of the local fishermen and the local residents of the island that we are able to have a better idea of the events that went on, and also the possible location of the crash site.
And do we know a little bit about how this aircraft might have descended down to the seafloor? I mean, would currents maybe have drifted it some way or another, or is it heavy enough that it could have just gone straight down?
Good question. That's what we're trying to determine as we locate the remains, as far as how large the debris field is. If the plane was relatively intact when it sank, it would be a more concentrated area, versus if there was a explosion, which the incident report alluded to, that there was some type of explosion that caused the plane to sink based upon the leaking fuel oil and possible ignition from vapors from that. If that is the case, there's probably a larger debris field of the wing and different parts and pieces, and those would have a larger scatter as they sank about 3,000 meters to the seafloor. So we will let everybody know the extent of the debris field, and that allows us to trace backwards the event that happened to cause it sinking.
And would you safe to say, I mean, is it a safe assumption that the Samoan Clipper has probably laid undisturbed for the last 81 years? We've talked about the depth at which the aircraft may very well be, as well as the lack of sort of wave and storm action and light may have protected it, as well as, humans aren't necessarily interacting that far down.
Yes, I would definitely agree that we are going to be most likely, or almost positively, the first eyes to view this plane since it went down in 1938. The site lies at a very deep depth, not one that is accessible to scuba divers, even to technical or commercial divers, and unless you have the amazing technology like we have here on Nautilus, it is unlikely that you'll be accessing the seafloor in 3,000 plus meters of water. So we're extremely excited and honored to be able to be part of this search and documentation.
And what makes the Nautilus so well equipped for a job like this? I mean, we do have, you know, the multi-beam sonar and dynamic positioning, A-frame and winch, and this versatile Hercules Argus dual ROV system. You know, what sort of makes Nautilus such a good candidate for searching for the Samoan Clipper?
I think it's the combined technology that is available, as well as the expertise of the crew and the technicians and everybody that makes this job happen. Driving an ROV at this depth around wreckage is not an easy thing to do, and all of the navigators and the video crew that are able to keep us on target, keep the ship on station, and the satellite link that broadcasts this out to everybody in the world. It's a unique and amazing opportunity to join us along on this expedition and sign on and participate. And we also interact with fellow colleagues and scientists ashore and gather their opinions and knowledge as we go along with this journey.
So this might be a good time to play the how did you come into the Nautilus world? And I can start. I am a journalist in my day job, my normal land job. And there was a story, it must have been like a year and a half ago now, about a firework jellyfish. And you know, it was running through the headlines and we covered it, and from that moment on I was hooked. I was listening to Nautilus in the background whenever I was writing other science related pieces, and you know, it's a little bit of an addicting experience just hearing all of us totally get excited about what we find, and whether that's, you know, marine biology or archaeology or any other ology, right? Anybody else want to share their Nautilus discovery story? Make you draw straws.
I'll go. I was part of a contracting group of scientists that sailed with the Nautilus for 3 years in the Gulf of Mexico, investigating how corals, deep water corals, were impacted by the BP oil spill. We had lots of different opportunities, ships of opportunity, different industry vessels that we sailed on during sort of the precursor to that project and throughout that project. But for 3 or 4 years of that project, we were aboard Nautilus. I got to come out and be a navigator and just fell in love with the ship.
I could go. I work for a company called Ocean Dynamics, based out of southern BC in Canada. And this company's got the contract to staff and manage the ROV department on board Nautilus. So being that I work with them, I'm often on board here, or it's usually either me or my boss or both.
I guess I'll go next. I'm currently at the University of New Hampshire, a graduate student, and I'm studying autonomous vehicles. And I heard about this internship, which sounded like a great way to supplement my schoolwork with some hands-on experience. So I went through the internship program.
And I'm lucky enough to work for Ocean Exploration Trust full-time, limelighting as a video intern. I think Suna's been with Nautilus the longest out of this group, though.
Maybe. I joined the ship when Nautilus was conducting exploration in the Mediterranean. It was in the Turkish waters, and I had just started my master's in biology, and I had an opportunity to come on the ship and start as a data logger intern. and yeah, been coming out since then. I think it was 2010, first time I came on.
That's cool. So it just sort of goes to demonstrate, you know, all of these different paths that we've taken. We have more, you know, writers, and then we have videographers and mappers and engineers. So it's really cool, right? We all come from different backgrounds, but here we are in this same control van. We do have another question. Approximately at what depth is the wreck expected to be located at?
I believe based upon the previous dive, we were at a little over 3,000 meters, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think 3,200 was the max depth.
We're on a relatively flat area. There is some fluctuation of depth, but it is relatively minimal. So it's been a nice muddy bottom with scattered rocks for the most part.
And about how far off the seafloor is Argus hovering?
You mean right now, or?
Or when we're doing the mapping?
Oh, I think we were trying to be on an altitude or around between 10 and 20 meters. 10 to 15 more.
So that number varies, but it is based upon the how far the side scan sonar can view out from the center. So we can vary that number to the quality of the data that is coming back to us.
And we often talk about this number, right, that some 95% of the ocean is unexplored. And so when we're looking at this grid area, this approximately 2 square mile area that we intend on mapping, you know, has this sort of been mapped out before? Have you know, what sort of interaction with the science world has this area seen?
So I believe the only real mapping of this area previous to the work that we're doing this week is a multi-beam survey of the area conducted by the Okeanos Explorer, which is a NOAA vessel. This was done in 2017. So this data provided a larger, more overall view of the seafloor topography and the terrain, and we used it for a guide in planning our more detailed side scan sonar survey.
So just a sort of refresher, what we're doing right now, Argus is descending down to about a little bit more than 3,000 meters towards the seafloor, and he will be conducting some side scan sonar of the seafloor bottom. So we're looking for any sort of abnormalities along the bottom of the ocean that look like they could be an object that was made by humans. So once we go through this 2 square mile grid, it'll take us a few more watches here. We can send Hercules down to do a little bit more in-depth characterizing of the seafloor, and then, you know, adding in that sort of video and photo component based on some potential targets that we've spotted. And In the last 2 dives, we've had about 10 potential targets. So it does look like we may have some exciting things. All right, we have another question. How much has changed in ROV technology since the Argus' early predecessor, Argo, was launched?
That's a good question. It's a really good question. A lot has changed, but at the same time, a lot is still the same. So instruments are always getting better and better every year. Not only the specific subsea ones, but the land-based ones that we adopt for subsea. And of course, all the simple solutions that we use for, the less expensive solutions. Maybe the viewers at home have seen us use hockey pucks for handles and stuff. That's pretty much the same. But yeah, sensors are always getting better, more capable, deeper rated, or any combination thereof. But the ones we have on board are not outdated. They're not obsolete at all. Yes, you get a little more fancy bells and whistles with some brand new technology. But it's not necessarily always worth it to go on that route. We're more than capable of doing all the stuff with what we have, even though it's not a lot of the time this year's technology. It's still quite current. I don't know if that's quite a good answer, but that's all I got.
And when was Argo launched?
Was launched or built?
Yeah, or built or conceived or...
Argus was built
Argo.
in... Argo?
Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
Argo was used in definitely the 80s. I'd have to look up what year it was built, but...
All right, let's look up. Let's do a little research here. But how about Argus?
Argus was built in the late 90s, early 2000s.
That's right. So Argo was it was most well known for its discovery of the Titanic, its role in the discovery of the Titanic in 1985. So that was a long time ago. I mean, that was the same year that Back to the Future came out. So if you think about how technology has changed just in the film industry, right? We're looking at potentially some pretty big differences. But Argo, it was capable of operating at depths of 6,000 meters. It was about 15 feet long, 3.5 feet tall, 3.5 feet wide, and it weighed about 4,000 pounds in the air. And of course, it was equipped with cameras that were looking forward and down. And it also had the capability of acquiring wide-angle film and pictures. So it flew about 50 to 100 feet above the seafloor. And then it was also towed from a vessel at the surface.
Yeah, so very much similar to Argus. But as Trevor was saying, a lot of the technology that makes up the guts of Argus is a little bit more advanced since the 80s. I'd say the cameras and the lighting are probably leagues above what they had on Argo.
And then Argus, not to be confused with the former Argo, is currently descending to a depth of more than 3,000 meters. And do we want to talk a little bit sort of just about the pattern in which our plan is to survey the bottom of the ocean? What sort of, you know...
So we have a about 2-mile square grid lined out with track lines that the vessel transit back and forth, similar to mowing the lawn. And those are spaced 200 meters apart to account for the range of the sonar, so we don't miss any blind spots. And we basically just make sure we cover those lines back and forth until we have completed the survey area. So it's pretty straightforward methodology and pretty standard for surveying for archaeological resources.
It's called a lawnmower pattern, right? I feel like that really helps to visualize.
Yep, just like mowing your lawn, back and forth. So it can sometimes feel just as monotonous as mowing your lawn back and forth, too.
There's great satisfaction with mowing your lawn, though.
Okay, point well taken.
And
it smells good. It smells good, too.
I mean, we will experience that, too, when we get through all this.
I was going to say, is there not great satisfaction with mowing this lawn?
There will be. You've got to wait till the job is done to really feel the accomplishment.
The payoff is different.
Yes.
And it takes 48 people to do it.
It's a big lawn.
And this lawn that we're mowing right now is at a depth of around 3,000 meters, a little more than 3,000 meters. What is the deepest Argus can go?
If Argus is by itself, it can go to 6,000 meters, but typically 4,000 when it's tethered to Herc.
And Ed Music, what, you know, we keep saying that he was a sort of this pioneer in the aviation industry, right? And so what do we know about Music and sort of his role in where commercial aviation is today?
So he was a pioneering pilot for Pan Am who assisted with the opening up of many of these international routes of travel that we have today. The Samoan Clipper, for example, which he piloted, was doing its test runs, for the most part, between the Pacific and Auckland, New Zealand. So these were places that were just opening up to mail and package and eventually passenger service. So he was one of the well-known pioneering pilots of Pan Am who piloted not only the Samoan Clipper but several of their other flying boats, and you know, doesn't get the respect as much as the Limburg name, but he had just as much accomplishment under his belt.
And, you know, I'd imagine most of us flew here from the West Coast, right? At some point or another of the U.S. That's a pretty expansive stretch of water to be flying over. And so, you know, in 1938, when the Samoan Clipper was doing this, I mean, was this sort of the beginning of pan or transoceanic flights?
Definitely. So we're talking about before World War II, and these were very long distance routes that required several stops. The Samoan Clipper, on its way to New Zealand, had to stop in Honolulu, Kingman Reef, and Pago Pago before eventually making it to New Zealand, just to deal with the fuel and the wear and tear on the crew. So I think we take it for granted how easy it is to simply get on a nonstop plane from Chicago to Honolulu, and all these pioneers before us that paved the way for the jet traffic that we have today.
All right, so I'm curious who took the longest to get here. My flight, let's see, I went from San Francisco to Samoa to American Samoa. It took me, with you know, a layover in Samoa, about 30 plus hours of traveling. Who's next?
I may have you beat. I came from Boston, so I had the Boston to Honolulu, and then Honolulu to Samoa. So there's a couple of long flights in there for sure, and layovers.
I came from Turkey.
Never mind, she beat me.
I came by boat.
Yeah, I came down by boat too.
Yeah, so did I guess. I guess so did Suna. Halfway.
Yeah, I got on in Honolulu.
Flew to Turkey and boated from there. That's weeks to get here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I crossed the Mediterranean in like 4 days.
And I think for a lot of our viewers, you know, the Nautilus often finds these incredible deep sea creatures. Last year, the gulper eel kind of stands out in my mind. And of course, we have the googly eye squid from a few years ago. Is it common as well that we are looking sort of for these human objects for aircrafts or vessels? Is this sort of unique?
We've been doing it a few times over the years. Certainly a lot when we were in the Mediterranean. We were primarily focused on archaeology, marine archaeology. A couple of trips recently in the Gulf of Mexico and off the coast of California as well, some of which some of the members of the team on board today have been involved in. So we've dove on Macon, which was a dirigible that crashed off the coast of California. Also the Independence, which was part of the, it was scuttled off of the San Francisco Bay Area, part of the Bikini Atoll atomic bomb tests. 18th century shipwreck in the Gulf of Mexico. So couple of pretty interesting projects over the years. So, but we're always we always look forward to these. It's a good chance to tell some history that needs to be told.
This might be the first airplane-focused survey. There were airplanes on the Macon, and I'm not sure if there were airplanes on the Independence, but to have a search for the Samoan Clipper as its sole target, I believe is a first for Nautilus.
Yeah, I think that's right. There were at least one plane on the Independence when we were there, and then in the Mediterranean we came across a plane that we were not searching for unexpectedly. But yeah, this is the first kind of search for one in particular that we've conducted.
And are there differences when it comes to looking for an aircraft maybe versus a vessel? And obviously, you know, when you're looking for a scuttled vessel, you sort of have a more general idea of where it's located, right? So this is a little bit different than previous ones.
Yeah, I think one of the main differences is the sheer size or quantity of material that you're dealing with. You're also not looking at potentially an object, you know, falling from the sky, crashing into the water, and then being dispersed, where the vessel might have sank, but it originated at the water's surface. So planes are a little harder to locate. Their materials are not as reflective to the side scan sonar. The large steel or iron hulls are pretty apparent and remain fairly intact for the most part, where a plane might be more broken up. So there's the equal challenges with planes versus shipwrecks for sure.
And then why the Samoan Clipper? You know, what sort of came to determining that this was the aircraft that we wanted to go out and look for?
So this project is really the brainchild of Russ Matthews, who will be joining us on a later watch. He's the president of the Air Sea Heritage Association, and he is a history buff. Specifically, airplanes are his forte, and he brought this idea forward to Ocean Exploration Trust during a scoping meeting, I believe about 5 years ago. And Ocean Exploration Trust sort of kept this potential white paper in their back pocket. And luckily they were going to be in the area right now and decided this would be a very exciting and a fruitful partnership to have, and just a good timing for the most part. It all takes the ingenuity and the fortitude of an individual, and that's definitely Russ Matthews. It's worth noting that Russ is also working with the Pan Am Historical Association, and I believe they have a museum So they are also partners on the project and have helped with the publicity and archives and connecting with some of the family members on board. So it's definitely a team effort comprised of numerous individuals and organizations to make this happen.
Right, and that's something as well that's really unique is, you know, this event had such a wide reach of impact, and so it's been really amazing to sort of collaborate across so many different platforms and understanding how that does impact people around the world, really, right?
Yeah, I think while we're looking for a physical object on the seafloor, it's only a representation of the human element that we are truly looking to recognize. This is also the grave site of 7 individuals, so we don't take that lightly. We take it very seriously, and we respect the site and hope to provide some more information to family relatives and inform everyone about the larger cultural landscape that exists off of American Samoa.
For those of you more seasoned Nautilus crew members, what is the most kind of surprising thing that you've discovered in your time here?
I'd have to say the octopus garden on Davidson Seamount. That was just incredible to see thousands and thousands and thousands of brooding octopus.
It's a good one. The most surprising thing I've seen on Nautilus would be the gulper eel, I think. That was unexpected. This big gelatinous sack looking thing, and then it opened its mouth. Like, what? Pretty cool.
I'm gonna have to go with the sperm whale diving on the vehicles in the Gulf of Mexico. It's pretty rare that you see something that large on an ROV dive. Pretty spectacular.
Yeah, the highlights from that are pretty awesome.
Yeah. That was an exciting day.
I think one of my favorite dives was the last dive on the previous expedition. The ones with the blue corals.
Yeah, that was
That
gorgeous.
was beautiful.
And the bell pepper